The year was 1776. The thunder of revolution rolled across the American colonies like a storm that could not be contained. From Boston to Virginia, farmers had dropped their plows, merchants their scales, and students their books, all to take up the musket in a war that promised either liberty or ruin. At the heart of this struggle was a young man whose name, though short-lived in life, would echo across centuries: Nathan Hale. A childhood of promise. Nathan was born on June 6, 1755, in Coventry, Connecticut, the sixth of 12 children in a devout Puritan family. The Hales were not wealthy, but they were rich in faith, discipline, and a sense of duty. His father, Richard Hale, was a respected farmer, and his mother, Elizabeth, instilled in her children a love for honesty and piety. From the start, Nathan stood out. He was bright, inquisitive, and quick with words. At the age of 14, Nathan and his brother Enoch were sent to Yale College, one of the few institutions of higher learning in the colonies. Yale was more than just a school. It was a forge where the ideals of the Enlightenment met the fervor of colonial resistance. There, Nathan drank deeply from the well of classical knowledge. He read Latin and Greek, studied philosophy and theology, and debated with fellow students about freedom, virtue, and the rights of man. He was known not only for his sharp intellect but also for his athletic skill. Hale excelled at wrestling, running, and ball games. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and carried himself with a natural grace that made him admired by his peers. But it wasn't only his body or mind that earned respect, it was his character. Nathan was earnest, humble, and guided by a moral compass that pointed unwaveringly toward duty. From teacher to soldier. When Nathan graduated in 1773, he was only 18. While many of his classmates pursued law or the ministry, Hale became a schoolteacher. He taught first in East Haddam, then later in New London, Connecticut. His students adored him. He was patient and kind, blending discipline with encouragement, making learning something to be cherished rather than feared. But outside the schoolhouse, the world was changing. The British government tightened its grip on the colonies, imposing taxes and laws that stirred resentment. Protests grew louder, and the call for independence began to swell. Hale, though young, was not indifferent. He read newspapers and pamphlets, listened to debates, and followed every turn of the struggle between crown and colony. By April 1775, when the first shots were fired at Lexington and Concord, the quiet schoolteacher faced a decision. Should he remain in his classroom, shaping young minds, or take up arms to shape the destiny of a nation? For Nathan, the answer was clear. "Let us march immediately," he declared to a friend, "and never lay down our arms until independence is achieved." Soon after, he left the classroom and joined the Continental Army. Early days of war. Hale received a commission as a lieutenant in the 7th Connecticut Regiment. He drilled his men, taught discipline, and led with fairness. His fellow soldiers admired him. He was brave, steady, and unshaken in the face of hardship. Yet, like many colonial officers, Hale's first months in uniform were marked less by glory and more by hunger, disease, and endless marches. The Continental Army was raw, poorly supplied, and often demoralized. But Hale, with his youthful optimism and burning sense of purpose, helped keep spirits alive. In March 1776, he joined the forces that occupied Boston after the British evacuation. For a brief moment, hope soared. The Patriots had driven out the enemy. But new storms gathered quickly. The British set their sights on New York City, a vital port and strategic jewel. If New York fell, it would become the enemy's stronghold in the colonies. General George Washington knew the fight ahead would decide the fate of the Revolution. The need for spies. The summer of 1776 was grim. Washington's army faced the largest British expeditionary force ever assembled, tens of thousands of redcoats, backed by powerful naval squadrons. The Patriots were outnumbered, outgunned, and dangerously short of supplies. To make matters worse, Washington was blind. He had little reliable intelligence about the enemy's strength, movements, or intentions. The solution was clear: he needed spies. Men who could slip behind enemy lines, gather information, and bring it back without being caught. But in those days, spying was considered dishonorable. Officers believed it beneath their dignity. Capture meant death, without mercy. Few were willing to risk it. It was then that Nathan Hale stepped forward. The volunteer. Accounts differ as to exactly how Hale volunteered, but all agree that he did so willingly, even eagerly. Washington's men knew the dangers. Capture as a spy was not like being taken prisoner in battle. A soldier might be exchanged or paroled. A spy was almost always hanged. Some officers argued that Hale was too valuable to risk, that he was young, idealistic, and lacked experience in espionage. But Nathan's mind was firm. Every kind of service necessary to the public good, he is said to have declared, becomes honorable by being necessary. To him, the risk of death was outweighed by the chance to serve his country in its hour of greatest need. He took off his uniform and disguised himself as a schoolmaster once more, this time posing as a loyalist teacher seeking work in New York. With only his wits and courage as weapons, he crossed into British-held territory in September 1776. New York City was crawling with British troops. Redcoats patrolled the streets, ships filled the harbor, and loyalists, colonists still loyal to the king, watched carefully for signs of rebellion. Hale had to blend in, all while secretly sketching maps, noting troop movements, and writing intelligence reports that he concealed in his shoes. He walked a dangerous line. If he slipped, if even one loyalist suspected him, his life would end swiftly. Yet Hale carried out his mission with calm determination. He moved quietly through the city, gathering knowledge that Washington desperately needed. For nearly 2 weeks, he lived on a knife's edge, his mind sharp, his nerves tested. Freedom itself seemed to walk beside him, fragile and uncertain, as if the fate of a nation was bound to the steps of one young spy. But fate, cruel and relentless, was closing in. The City of Shadows. New York in September 1776 was a city in chains. British flags flew over its buildings, warships filled the harbor, and soldiers patrolled every street. What had once been a bustling port of merchants and traders was now the nerve center of the British war effort. Nathan Hale entered this world not as a soldier but as a shadow. Disguised as a loyalist schoolteacher, he carried forged papers and the calm demeanor of a man who belonged. But beneath the disguise, every step was a gamble. A slip of the tongue, a wrong gesture, even a moment of hesitation could expose him as a spy. Hale knew the danger. Spying was considered one of the vilest crimes in warfare. To be caught meant no mercy, no honorable treatment as a prisoner of war. It meant the rope. Yet he pressed on, believing that the survival of Washington's army depended on the knowledge he could bring back. Gathering secrets. By day, Hale played his role as a wandering teacher, speaking politely with locals, asking harmless questions, and earning their trust. By night, he observed troop encampments, counted supplies, and sketched maps of British positions. He recorded his notes in Latin, hoping that if they were discovered, the code might buy him precious time. The British presence was overwhelming. Nearly 30,000 troops crowded the city and surrounding islands, supported by a fleet of warships. Hale saw endless supplies flowing in from across the Atlantic, food, weapons, ammunition, while Washington's men went hungry and ragged. He realized the scale of the challenge before the Patriots, but he also spotted weaknesses: the placement of defenses, the routes of patrols, the vulnerabilities of supply lines. Each secret he uncovered was a spark that could light Washington's strategy. But every spark came at a terrible risk. The fire that changed everything. On September 21, 1776, disaster struck New York. A massive fire tore through the city, destroying nearly a quarter of its buildings. Flames devoured homes and warehouses, leaving thousands homeless. The cause of the fire was never proven, Some suspected Patriot saboteurs, others believed it was accidental, but the British reacted with fury. In the chaos, Loyalist informants became more vigilant, watching for any hint of rebel activity. The city, already dangerous for Hale, became a trap tightening around him. Suspicion grew, patrols multiplied, and whispers of spies spread through the streets. For Hale, the timing could not have been worse. With notes hidden in his shoes and maps concealed in his belongings, he prepared to slip back across enemy lines and deliver his intelligence to Washington. But fate had marked him. The betrayal. Accounts of Hale's capture differ, but most point to betrayal. Some say it was a Loyalist cousin who recognized him. Others claim he was tricked by British soldiers posing as friendly patriots. What is certain is that Hale was betrayed by human weakness, trust placed in the wrong hands. As he prepared to leave New York, Hale met with men he believed were sympathetic to the Patriot cause. In truth, they were double agents working for the British. His disguise was pierced, his questions exposed, and soon he was seized by British patrols. The moment of capture was swift and merciless. Hale was searched, and the notes hidden in his shoes were discovered. Maps, observations, details of troop positions, all damning evidence that he was not a wandering schoolteacher, but a spy in the service of George Washington. Before the lion's den, Hale was taken to the headquarters of General William Howe, the British commander in New York. Howe was no stranger to war or espionage. He knew exactly what to do with spies. Hale was interrogated, his notes examined, his fate sealed. There would be no trial, no debate. Hale was a captured spy, and the punishment was death. He would be hanged at dawn. The news must have struck him like thunder. 21 years old, with a bright future cut short. He had dreamed of serving his country with honor, of returning home victorious, perhaps of resuming his life as a teacher and scholar. Now all that lay before him was a rope and a wooden scaffold. Yet, those who saw him that night were struck by his composure. Nathan Hale did not beg, nor did he curse his captors. He faced his fate with the calm dignity of a man who believed his sacrifice was not in vain. That night, Hale was confined in a small, bare cell. Some accounts say he asked for a Bible, but was refused. He requested writing materials and managed to compose letters, one to his mother, one to his brother, and others to friends. The contents of those letters are lost to history, reportedly destroyed by the British officer who received them, but those who witnessed him said his words were filled with courage and faith. The silence of that night must have been heavy. Outside, the city smoldered from the great fire. British soldiers celebrated their control, while Patriot prisoners groaned in chains. And in a lonely cell, Nathan Hale awaited death. The dawn of sacrifice. On the morning of September 22nd, 1776, Hale was led from his cell. The streets were alive with curious onlookers. British soldiers marched beside him, their muskets glinting in the sunlight. He walked without faltering, tall and calm, as if he were not marching toward the gallows but toward destiny. The scaffold stood ready. A rope swung gently in the morning breeze. The crowd gathered, some jeering, some silent, all watching the final moments of a young man's life. Nathan Hale climbed the steps. His hands were bound, his face pale but resolute. The executioner waited for the signal. Hale was asked if he had any last words. What he spoke next would be etched forever into the story of America. September 22nd, 1776. The air was sharp, carrying the smell of smoke from the great fire that had recently ravaged New York. The city was tense, unsettled, restless. Soldiers lined the streets as townspeople gathered in grim anticipation. A young man, just 21 years old, was being led to the gallows. His name was Nathan Hale. He walked with dignity, even as chains bound his hands. Those who saw him later recalled his composure. He did not plead, he did not tremble. Instead, he carried himself like a soldier who had accepted his fate, even if that fate was cruel. The British had sentenced him to death as a spy, and there would be no mercy. The scaffold loomed ahead. The crowd hushed as Hale ascended the wooden steps. The rope swung from the beam, waiting. A hush fell as the executioner prepared. The British officer overseeing the execution asked Hale if he had any last words. Words that echo forever. What Hale said in that moment transformed him from a condemned man into a symbol of liberty. "I only regret that I have but one life to lose for my country." The words cut through the silence like a blade. Simple, yet filled with unshakable resolve. To the British, they were the defiance of a man who refused to bow. To the Americans, they were the embodiment of the Revolution's spirit. In truth, Hale was likely echoing lines from a play he had read during his Yale days, Joseph Addison's Cato, a tragedy that glorified Republican virtue and self-sacrifice. But in that moment, the borrowed words became his own. The executioner did his work quickly. The rope tightened, and Nathan Hale's brief life ended. 21 years old. A schoolteacher turned soldier, turned spy, now a martyr. The British reaction. The British officers recorded the event with a mixture of respect and dismissal. Some mocked the young man's naivety. Others admired his courage. Captain Frederick Mackenzie, a British officer present that day, noted in his journal that Hale behaved with great composure and resolution. Another observer remarked that Hale seemed more concerned with his country's fate than with his own death. To the British command, it was just another execution. But in reality, they had created a martyr. Hale's sacrifice would soon inspire thousands, and his name would become immortal. News reaches the Patriots. Word of Hale's execution traveled slowly to the Continental Army. Washington himself learned of it weeks later. Though devastated, he recognized the power of Hale's final words. Washington shared the story, ensuring it would spread among his soldiers and beyond. The impact was electric. Here was a young man, barely more than a boy, who had walked into the jaws of death for liberty without flinching. His sacrifice gave the Revolution something it desperately needed in those dark days: hope, courage, and a model of patriot virtue. The patriots were losing battles, retreating, suffering hunger and despair. But Hale's last words reminded them that their cause was worth more than any single life. His martyrdom became a rallying cry. The legacy of sacrifice. Over the years, Nathan Hale's story grew into legend. Monuments were raised in his honor, from his home state of Connecticut to the heart of New York City. Statues depict him bound, awaiting execution, yet standing proud. His image became a symbol of youthful patriotism, of selfless devotion to liberty. Generations of Americans have quoted his words as the essence of sacrifice. Schoolchildren memorized his story, soldiers carried it into battle, and leaders invoked it to inspire unity. The quiet schoolteacher who had once taught Latin and mathematics in a village classroom became an immortal figure in the narrative of America's birth. The meaning of his martyrdom. Nathan Hale's story is powerful not only because of his death, but because of what it represents. He was not a general, nor a politician, nor a man of great wealth or influence. He was an ordinary young man, educated but humble, who believed so deeply in the cause of freedom that he risked everything. In giving his life, he reminded the world that liberty is not won by leaders alone, but by the sacrifices of ordinary people who choose courage over comfort. His words endure because they speak to something eternal, the willingness to give all for a cause greater than oneself. Closing reflections. When we look back on the Revolution, names like Washington, Jefferson, and Adams dominate the stage. But in the quiet shadow of their greatness stands Nathan Hale, a figure of pure conviction. His life was short, his mission a failure, his death cruel. Yet through that death, he became a symbol stronger than any victory in battle. On that September morning in 1776, a young man climbed a scaffold in New York and declared that he regretted only that he could not give more to his country. Nearly 250 years later, His words still stir hearts, reminding us that freedom is never free, and that the spirit of sacrifice is the foundation of liberty. Nathan Hale lived but 21 years. Yet in those years, he gave America something priceless, a legacy of courage that will never die.